All right. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. It's not really a regular council meeting, but I'm going to cheat a little bit as we look at that. What this is a requirement as we do these sort of projects that we post it, that we have a public hearing where information can be presented. I will note that I did receive one set of comments from Katie Young via email. Those have been printed for a hard copy and shared with consultant, as well as been shared electronically, and they will be included in the packet next time. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Bailey, who will do a presentation. At the end of that presentation, what we'll do is we will allow for some public comment and Q&A. I'll try to keep it lax. If the environment causes me to go more formal, we'll go more formal, but in the absence of a need to, we'll try to knock from there. Is there anything else I need to do from an official standpoint other than say this is a public hearing?
Yep, no,
on the bank stabilization project at 19th Street and Highway 212 and review of the environmental review for the record. Bailey, you have the floor.
All right, thanks, Mayor. Yep, like the Mayor mentioned, this is a public hearing to garner feedback on the Rocky Fork Bank Stabilization Project, and we're also going to review the draft environmental assessment that I pulled together for the project. So we can go through some of the environmental impacts that we see and how some might be beneficial, some might be potentially adverse, and just garner some public feedback on that. But first, I want to share a little bit about the project, and this is going to be a pretty short presentation because this is a fairly small footprinted area. But so the project location, it's at the intersection of 19th Street and Highway 212 or Broadway Ave. It is immediately adjacent to the bridge that's there on the northwest abutment. So on the northwest side of that bridge. So as we all know, this land was previously privately held by the Rocky Fork Inn. There was a gigantic flood in 2022 that unfortunately damaged this property, but the flood also did some damage to the bank in that area. So this is a project to address a more permanent bank stabilization project for about 150 lineal feet of bank frontage in front of what used to be the Rocky Fork Inn. We looked at this bank, and it was we consider it susceptible to erosion, and it's also adjacent to a bridge abutment that we wanted to protect as well. So some of that will run right up to the bridge abutment / wing wall to make sure we can protect that public infrastructure. As you can see here, here's kind of, I think this is I stole this from KGBQ online, but this was post-flooding that happened. You can see some of the damage to the Rocky Fork Inn, and also get a glimpse of what the current bank is. The city did a lot of work post-demolition of the Rocky Fork Inn, as well as if you can drive down there, you can see they leveled that and did some site grading. So this project has a fairly short history if you don't count, all the years after the flood, but from the initiation period. It was initiated in early 2026 when the city looked at that and wanted to maybe come up with some alternatives or just some project that could permanently stabilize that bank. We had recently constructed a project at 9th Street and Cooper that was using in a similar scenario where the flood of 2022 had damaged some city infrastructure. So this was kind of this is going to be a similar project to that one. So if you ever get time, you can go down there at 9th Street and Cooper and see that project that was constructed last year. So this project was initiated. The city of Red Lodge contracted Great West to pretty much take this project all the way to construction. this project has already been surveyed. We've done some preliminary design on it. We've done some hydraulic modeling because a lot of our, whenever you go to construct something in the river, you have to go through a series of permitting, and one is making sure you don't have a rise in the river post improvements. DNRC requires that, and that's done through the local floodplain administrator. So the next steps after garnering your guys' feedback is submitting our joint permit application that's sent to Montana DEQ, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the local floodplain administrator to get permits for construction on this project. We'll also conduct final design, pull together a bidding package, publicly bid this for contractors, and then award that project and ultimately construct that project. Just a quick description of what some elements of the project. The 150 lineal feet of bank that will be stabilized. With these, you reshape the bank, you put angular rock that kind of locks the bank into place. You plant willows to promote vegetation on the site. One thing that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks brought up on the 9th Street and Cooper project was root wads. What a root wad is like a fallen tree, but it still has the root ball intact. We embed that in the riverbank, and what that does is it promotes a little scour under that root wad, and is good habitat for fish populations. We'll also topsoil and use seed or hydro seed the finished product on top. Another look. This picture was taken in early February of just kind of the current condition of the bank. You could see some of the exposed soil kind of on the top side, and then with bank stabilization projects, you can see a lot of non-angular rock. We see that as easily erodible. It can roll very easy, and it can leave that bank exposed in future high water events, or any high water events for that matter. And then you can also see this is taken on the bridge right there at 19th Street and Highway 212, and the bridge wing wall is just to the left side of the picture. So this is looking at a preliminary site plan that we're going to submit for permitting. You know, if this was like a giant screen, it'd be great, but this is fantastic. But as you can see, the red hatched area or filled in area is going to be where the riprap rock is placed, all the way until the bridge abutment / bridge wing wall, and then the green is some site restoration and grading back to existing ground and then topsoil feeding. But ultimately, even the red down to what we consider the ordinary high water mark, or what we model to be where the river would rise, on an every year basis. It will be topsoil seeded down there, similar to our 9th Street and Cooper project. You can't really see it here, but there is another light shaded green kind of running down towards the toe of the slope. That's our willow planting zone. We honestly plant like 1/2 inch to 1 inch diameter willow stem per inch. So, there's going to be between 1,500 and 2,000 willows planted on this project. And then you can't really see, but there will be a root wad at the north side of the project there. Okay. Yes.
Okay, Dave. What's the dimension going up slope? How far does that extend?
So it's about 18 feet from the toe of the slope to up, but that's not looking at the slope like the 3D. That's just like the 2D, so it's probably 19 to 20 feet in that area. I have some quantities here too. Right now, we're estimating roughly 140 cubic yards of MDT Class 3 riprap which is, you know, it's not, you know, it's not a bunch, but it's, you know, compared to 9th Street and Cooper, it's not nearly as much as that. Trying to think if there's anything else on this slide that I need to point out. So, looking back at our permitting plans, again, this is what we call a section view. So if you cut the river, we're looking at the bank. The dashed line that runs from the left to the right of the section view is the existing topography. So we came through, we LiDAR'd the site, we went in the river, surveyed it with GPS to get comprehensive site topography to do our design work. You could see that the rock is approximately 4 feet thick. It ranges between 3 to 4 feet thick, and it's going to be embedded into the existing native soil around there. And then we also have our willow stakes that we're going to plant in there. But so the point of these willow stakes is to just kind of bind together some of that native ground behind the riprap and also try to hold it in place as best as we can. A lot of the time on these types of projects, we would put a liner behind the riprap. We initially proposed that on the 9th Street and Cooper project, but we spoke to one of our more senior natural resource guys, and he thought that we could get away with not using a line here just due to the well-graded gravel of Red Lodge soils behind it. Because one way these banks fail is you'll get high water that comes through, gets into the fines behind the riprap, and then we call it piping, where the fines wash through the riprap, and then ultimately the rock starts to settle behind it and the bank fails. So that's a concern as an engineer, to make sure that our project holds up, you know, for as long as possible. So slopes will range anywhere from 2.5 to 3 to 1. We just try to match the existing bank slope. So we look at the bank slope and try to match, you know, how the bank slopes naturally look right now. Trying to think if there's anything else. I think one thing we did on the 9th Street and Cooper project that will apply to this project is we elect to go with a hydro seeding versus just a regular seeding, because the hydro seeding seems to take better, and it also controls dust. If you're not getting a lot of moisture, it kind of lays that down. So a few reasons why we would go with a hydro seed there instead of just a regular seed mix that you kind of throw on the ground, mix it with the topsoil. So I'm going to move on to some of the draft environmental assessment items that we pulled together. So in March, I pulled this draft together. We notified local, state, and federal agencies. You know, that ranges, I mean, there's a list of 20 that we send letters to with a proposed map, so they have, and we give them a period of 30 days to comment on it. To this point, it's been 30 days. I haven't received anything out of the ordinary. You know, most of the time I don't receive a bunch back from these departments, but I have gotten a few responses, but they're just pretty generic. What they usually send back, like the Army Corps would send back, you got to make sure you get your permit. After you know, make sure we get the permit. You know, some other we send letters to all the tribes in the area as well, so they can have time to comment on it. So then we published the notice of public hearing in the Carbon County News in late March for this hearing. And then we've had this draft environmental assessment here at City Hall, so the residents can come look at it during this comment period. So I'm going to go through and kind of point out maybe some potentially adverse environmental impacts that we can see as doing a project like this. And we didn't really see anything permanent, but there's always items with construction, when you go into construction, that are nuisances. And so this draft report goes through social impacts, economic impacts, hazardous facilities, you know, so for instance, like a hazardous facility would be like a leaky underground storage tank from a previous gas station, or wetlands protection, wildlife protection. It's a pretty comprehensive look at the environmental impact, visual quality. So three things that we saw as potentially adverse during the project are the effects on the surrounding air quality. This is a fairly typical item that we see potentially adverse because we're going to have construction in the area, so that could create dust and fumes and stuff like that. Nuisances caused by glares and fumes. Similarly, it's going to be temporary due to regular construction activities, and that goes for noise as well. So, if you haven't, I'll leave the comment period open for a few more days. So if after this hearing you guys can look at this, but I do want to go through some of the benefits I think of the project are just, you know, protecting the city's, well, it's not city owned, but it's protecting the public's infrastructure, being that bridge and making sure we don't erode around that wing wall and make sure that bridge, wing wall, or abutment would fail. And then just, you know, making, you know, stabilizing that bank will help that city-owned property right there and potentially be turned into whatever the city deems it should be positive for the community. And then ultimately, I think it's a fairly good project. We do these quite a bit. Like, we've had success in Red Lodge before doing these projects. So with that, I mean, there's no other agenda items I have to cover as far as the project's concerned. Like I said, we've just gone through preliminary design, looked at hydraulic modeling. Our next step would be to put in for our permits on this project so we could construct it, and those permits typically last for a year. And so we have like a year to construct after receiving the permit. So.
Bailey, can I add just something?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that we had selected you guys and asked you guys to do this, but you were rather humble. Part of the reason that we reached out to Great West on this is just those who were at council meeting last week may remember that Mike Maples wasn't there or at the standing committee meetings that day. And that is because the city, the engineering firm, and the contractor who did that were down accepting an award for the Ninth Street project for the best implemented project under $3 million in the region. And I'll let Mike speak to how wide that was. But as we were looking at this and closing timelines with the federal guidelines on that Rocky Fork property, they put a lot of money in that we have to meet. We said, let's go with the folks that the Army Corps of Engineers, FWP, they all got together collectively and said this was the best executed project. So I thought, let's start at the same starting point and cross our fingers and hope we get a lot of the same players involved. So that was part of that selection process. So that's how we got to Great West in this meeting again.
I just have one question about that.
Yep.
Was a more natural bank restoration approach thought about at all? I mean, I know the bridge abutment, but then maybe the tail of that.
Yep.
I mean, with the Rocky Fork in, and I guess we don't really know what the city's going to do with the property, but with no more infrastructure or anything on the property, it seemed like this would be a place where you could have a little bit more natural approach.
Yep, we always think about that. One thing, you know, as an engineer and protecting my projects is ensuring that the project is going to hold too. You know, there has been in a situation like this where we're just immediately downstream from that infrastructure, I personally feel more confident using like an angular riprap because, you know, if this project doesn't hold, it's going to reflect on me as a design engineer, and if it fails. So that's one thing that I take into account, and also protecting, you know, the city's investment over there, being that property. But, so, you know, one thing we did on the 9th Street and Cooper project, the majority was done just like the cross-section I showed you. But there was an area that wasn't going to see as much velocity and flows to erode that bank, that we used, for instance, coarse wood, and more river cobble to do more of a patchwork job. But that was a very small area that is going to see the velocity, the river velocities, because, you know, it just has a lot of shear right off the edge of that rushing water that can really start to erode that material. So, you know, it's always considered, but, you know, using angular riprap just really holds together the bank and stabilizes it more, in my comfort zone than maybe like a coarse wooded project would, using river or round rock, for instance.
And then go.
No, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. It looked like the height of the rock was the full, so was the rock only going to the Q2 or the high water and then topsoil above, or was it rock all the way to the top and then rock covered the topsoil?
So the rock doesn't, it's close to the top of the bank, but we wouldn't run it. It's just how we see our modeling layout and where that ordinary high water mark is, and then we'll go, you know, a little bit above that just to give that a little bit more protection, say it's, you know, the Q3, Q4, but, you know, this, I have to remind people sometimes, this isn't a flood mitigation measure. If it was, we'd put a berm up where, you know, to make sure. So this is a bank protection project, not I think the Q100 was shown to be right near the top of the rock, so it's more like a Q100 type rock elevation. But yeah, so it will go.
So the rock goes up and then the rock is covered with topsoil.
Yeah.
We're not talking about just toe rock and then bank above it.
Yep, it's the rock will be covered in topsoil and then seeded over the top of it. Mm-hmm.
Bailey, does your photo that you have in there earlier, does that capture the eddy? I was looking to see if I could see it, but those who've had a chance to walk down, there's a spot closer to the trees than to the bridge where it had kind of eddied in and it was taken out just a big hole. And that was, and again, that's one of those that if that happened naturally over time and not stopped, that would have caused me great concern, because we'd have had water going down Broadway again.
And you could, you know, like the mayor said, we did notice a hole in our topography survey down in there too, that it was starting to backflow and eddy in that area. And I should point out that the extents of the project, if you're looking at this picture, are from the edge of the bridge to the existing vegetation. So we're not going to touch that existing vegetation right there. It could go right to it.
It's proven itself.
Yes, it's proven itself over how many years?
What is a willow stick?
A willow stake is a harvest.
Stake.
Yep. Willow stake is a harvested dormant willow that you embed into the existing soil that protrudes through the new bank stabilization that starts to grow naturally.
It is alive. It's capable of growing.
Yes.
Okay.
And they will, if done right, they will grow like you wouldn't believe.
Do they have a good survival rate for transplanting?
So that's always the question. It's just depending on how you implement it. I think Mike can maybe state to this. I think our willows at 9th Street and Cooper are going to do very well comparatively to the ones that were done across the lane.
Because there's no way to water them.
Well, but they're
Getting moisture
ideally
from the stream.
implemented, like he said correctly, those roots are in,
Okay.
they're in the water
I see.
So,
down there. I mean,
yeah.
There's one version of implementing or planting them, where you check off the box that says you plant willows, and then there's another version which our contractor did, which is a little more work and goes in and then they stick and they last.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you just go down there, Ninth and Cooper, and you look at the east and the west bank, you can see the difference between the two projects, and hopefully this project will look like the west bank.
So we can go down and look at Cooper area, and that's pretty much what we're gonna see.
Yeah.
This side of the bank, not the other side.
Sure. Well, can I ask, sorry if that's too many questions.
No, it's great.
When you're filling up one side of this river,
Mhm.
do you consider what effect it might have on the other side?
So we look
The other
at,
bank.
you know, we look at the water elevation to make sure that we're not going to, so for instance, if we protruded this bank further into the river,
Yeah.
it would cause a rise on the other side of the river, or downstream, or upstream.
And change velocity.
It would change, yeah, so we have to make sure that when we do these, you know, and, yeah, I mean, when we go through the DNRC floodplain permit, they, you know, they really look at this stuff very closely, so, and just gonna touch on the willow stake thing, because I love those, I think it's so interesting, but, we actually lowered the willows on that project to make sure that the stems were in the water and during low water, to make sure that they were getting water
You took them
year-round.
down closer to the stream.
Yes, during design, yep. So we usually have them near the ordinary high water mark. Well, that's where I had them initially. The more senior natural resource guy told me that we're gonna move those down, get them closer to the river. I'm like, all right.
You also plant a lot of them,
Uh-huh,
so that if only 10% of them make it.
uh-huh.
That's good.
Yeah, for instance, Knight Cooper had 8,000 willow stakes that were harvested regionally by the contractor, in the early or late spring, before they bloomed,
How many lineal feet were down there?
700.
Versus
Versus
100, just been a nice meander.
A nice meander through there.
You only need another 1,000 feet of width.
Uh-huh.
When might this project take place? I mean, you have to get all your permits and that sort of thing, and I'm thinking about, like you said, they harvested those willow stakes this time of the year.
Yep, so that's kind of, you know, where it, you know, our timeline is, it depends on the willow stakes. You can source them non-regionally, which if we went for like a late fall, or a late summer, early fall construction window, we would have to look at, getting them from a nursery, for instance, as opposed to harvesting them locally. It's just the timeline of this project is, you know, a little bit pushed to get it started this spring, just because the permits take time, you know, because I had, you know, this public hearing takes 30 days, then you have a 30-day on top of your comment period on top of your floodplain permit, so it's just time and time. So if everything goes right, you know, late summer, early fall construction, if we have the contractor we had last time on the 9th Street Cooper, they'd be in and out of there, and you'd blink and you'd say, what happened? But it looks great. So hopefully that's something that can
Is there
happen.
any way to harvest the willows now and keep them dormant?
Yeah, I mean, the city could procure the willows on that, and then, but to keep them dormant would be the tricky part, you know, I don't know. We might have to consult with a nursery or somebody to, because for instance, our contractor on the other project put them in a dark room for a month in a, you know, horse trough to make sure that they stay dormant. So I don't know, you know, that would be something, but we might have to consult with, you know, some sort of vegetation professional.
Blackout shade for this room here.
I mean, I think
Yeah, we can put them in here, Dave.
because we're dealing with lesser number on this project,
Yeah.
that if we can figure out how to do it, I think that,
Yeah.
but we're still up against the clock right now.
Mm-hmm. You know, and, yeah, it's just, I think it was just keeping it dormant would be the challenging part, and making sure they didn't, you know, die off in the process, because, you know, like along the bench here, I think you have just tons of willows. Those ones were harvested down by the Yellowstone on 9th Cooper, but, locally, there's a bunch to choose from too. But, you know, if that's something the city's interested in procuring them, themselves, it would save costs on the project. And, you know, it could potentially, you know, maybe shorten the time frame on, or the, you know, construction window and push it closer to the middle of summer than no.
Is there a difference in survival rate versus remotely sourced, or is it just a cost difference?
You know, I don't know if there's a difference between it. You know, I've never sourced them from a nursery. I've always seen them locally sourced. Like, the contractor just goes, like, you know, down the river a ways and harvests them. So I sat in on a project at the recent conference where they had a nursery sourced harvesting. So I have a contact there if I needed to reach out and see how they got their willows. But
you can harvest after or once they go dormant. So you can harvest late fall too.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I know late summer, early fall, probably not, but if you went to all this effort and then your project got pushed back anyway,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be like, well, we got a bunch of frozen willows in the basement, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm very grateful that somebody else is paying for them, all of it in general. So this is a project that won't be costing any, we don't have a local match on anything on this. Right, Mike? I'm not lying?
I'm not sure if we have a match on that or not.
I think we've got it with the resiliency set aside, but.
Okay. Because I know if you went through DES and the FEMA funds,
Yeah.
there was a,
It
Same-
said 75.
Same DES grant that helped purchase the land and take the building down. I think we have a little match on it, I'm not sure.
Okay.
yeah, I thought it was 75% FEMA funded.
Cap, yeah.
DES would provide an additional 12.5%.
Okay.
I thought that was what it was on the FEMA, and then the local funds would be potentially 12.5, but that was on that project.
Yeah.
It could be very well if you're funding it similarly, that would be here. You know, we've done preliminary costs on this, and it's right around that $80,000 cost range to do this construction project. So that opens opportunities for bid solicitation instead of an open bidding. So the city would go to 3 different contractors to solicit bids. You wouldn't open it up to a public bidding process. So what that, you know, the law is if it's under 80,000. So we're right there at that.
79.9?
Yeah, as long as I said, you know, if you go with 79.9, but the risk, you run the risk if all those contractors you solicited bids from are over 80,000, then you have to go open bid the project.
that's important too. These sorts of projects really need somebody that knows what they're doing, and not just anybody,
Mm-hmm.
a low bid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not always the best.
Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't think so. No.
Looking at the public, any comments there?
In a sense, it's unrelated, but again, it's not, and I'm being optimistic, assuming that the city is going to acquire the Eagle's Nest. How will this bank stabilization affect that area down there on the other side of that,
Downstream.
the trees?
Yeah, so that would be a similar comment to this gentleman's comment of, you know, we look at the river elevation level and we don't want to see a rise. So, so if the water will not rise in this project. So, I mean, the river does what the river does type of thing. But we're trying to minimize our impact to the water elevation, the water surface elevation in these types of projects. Actually, we cannot have a rise. If we have a rise, the project will not get permitted.
So will we have to do bank stabilization down the Eagle's Nest area?
So we don't, you know.
I mean, not with this, associated with this, but looking ahead.
Okay, sorry.
And I don't know, part of that may depend on what they dictate. So if they tell us that we need to, I have not seen, and I'm not a specialist anyway, but I have not seen anything down there that scares me like the side of that bridge having no dirt around it, and then the kind of the big washout inside. So If there is, by the way, that would be something that we are responsible for 25% of whatever improvements we do down there, so we'll be watching that as well. And all of these projects, there is always a goal to impact the environment as little as possible, of course, while keeping an eye out for those pesky humans.
Yep, and so, you know, I did receive a comment, it's a lengthy one. I just briefed it, so I don't wanna, you know, I'm gonna be paraphrasing extremely.
And that will be in the packet, in the upcoming packet for everybody who wants to read that.
And it was from Montana Trout Unlimited, from Katie Young, who's the Beartooth project manager. And it touched on the, more using less rock comment that this gentleman had earlier in the hearing. So that, you know, so I guess my justification is, after I read the more lengthy comment here, you know, if there's something in there, we could potentially change in the environmental assessment because it is a draft. If there's a point in here that I, you know, take and can do that, so.
So the comments we're trying to improve fish habitat? Is that the gist of it?
Well, it's basically saying, it's pointing out projects, of similar scope and size that have used a different type of bank stabilization section. You know, and she did point out like the coarse wood, that we use down there in a less velocity shear driven environment. You know, I don't know if this person has seen, for instance, the root wad that we would be installing to promote a fish habitat in that area, so I'm sure they'll be pleased when they see that element of the project. I know Fish, Wildlife, and Parks like to see it. So if I were looking at this as strictly as like a structural engineering issue, I'd have that mat laid down where piping of fines was not an issue. I would, you know, if I was just looking at protecting the property and holding it right there, I would, you know, do a little bit differently and not as, you know, not as risky as leaving out that, for instance, that mat, because that's something that it can fail structurally. So we feel confident it won't, but, you know, to ensure it. But that's something that's not a biodegradable type of mat either. That would stay there permanently. But that has been permitted before in Red Lodge, you know, across the stream from the FEMA bank project on 9th and Cooper. It had, I believe they had a mat under there, so.
You can see it. Well, they had a mat on top.
Yeah, so.
Did we not have a mat on the FEMA project that the willows are through? Okay.
It's all, what we call that is, what do we call it? Infill riprap with topsoil, essentially, with seeded on top.
So the fabric does not help the willows, it's not necessarily required to get the willows to stabilize well.
No, not that we see it, because that willow stem, we plant 70% of it in the bank and 30% is exposed.
How long are they?
Those were like 10 feet or you know, something along that magnitude. I mean, they were,
Wow.
maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe they were like 8 feet, 6 feet maybe.
How do you stick them in there without damaging them?
Yeah, so which,
The contractor had a pretty good technique.
yeah, so you excavate and you do the toe. Get back to my section here. You excavate the river bottom, you build up to where you plant your willow, and then you start placing you dig a trench, you start placing your willows on that, and then you place, yep, then you place the riprap on top of those.
You don't stick the rocks in first
And try to jam them in there. Yeah.
You guys on the other side might have done that.
So, like I said, I think I'll keep this open for a few more days, just to see if anything else comes through. But then I'll, Mike, I do need your signature on, or not Mike, Mayor Dave, I do need your signature or a resolution at some point on this to just make it not a draft, make it an official one. So,
I'll let me check with legal and see if that's something I need a resolution or if it was already authorized as we started this process.
right, okay.
I will note for the record, there is not any comment online, and in fairness, I don't think we shared the link. It just seemed like a good way to capture this for the record. Last call for public comments. All right, I'm gonna go ahead. If this first document, the letter was 2 pages, and the attachment she put to it was 16. If there's anybody here who's interested in that, I'd be happy to print a hard copy you can take with you. If you just want to wait till it's in the packet, kill less trees, that's fine too. So
When you say the packet, you mean the next city council?
the city council packet will be going out tomorrow, actually,
Okay.
in the afternoon. So, Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add, sir?
Nope.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you all for coming.